the focus really is on this internal fire. We could point at testosterone, but it's the fire from within could very much so expressed through sexuality and very much so expressed through anger. But playing with the fire is the only way to learn how to be with it. And I think we live in a society that doesn't allow us to play with these inner fires in the way that we need to so that we can be skilled. I'm not going to learn how to be able to spin fire if I don't ever try.
Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mujica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. So I am joined by Ean Wood. Welcome.
Thank you, Luis. Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
Ian and I have been wanting to do this for a few weeks and for longer than a few weeks, but we wanted to do it for a few months, and then it took us a couple weeks to get it down. I'm so happy to have you here because I don't hear men talking about sexuality, trauma, identity, emotions together in a way that's like really intimate the way I like to. And so it's why I wanted to do this with you. It's why I'm starting the men's group I'm starting next year. And I'm excited to kind of just explore and journey this with you. And
Yeah.
I kind of, before I go into that, before I take us into this little journey, tell us what we should know about you. Like, tell us who you are, what about you, anything that feels important.
Yeah, I think the most pertinent information is that I've been involved with men's groups, men's circles since I was a boy. My father struggled with mental health. He was taking an alcohol chemical dependency class. His teacher told him about men's groups, and he started then, and it's just something that I've been around for a long time. So it's been a teaching that life has presented me. It wasn't a chosen path at first. It became a chosen path later, but it's really being with men in this deeply intimate way is just something that's been a part of my life.
And I'm assuming, but I don't know, did you have that intimacy with your father?
Yeah. Me and my father are just so close.
Beautiful. So you were born into a situation where male affection and intimacy was predictable for you. That was part of your life.
100%. My father, I would say, actually was more in the feminine position as far as more of nurturing the emotion and how are you doing? Let's talk about what's going on in your mind and with your heart, because he had to. It was survival for him to take care of himself. So that just rippled into our connection, being really important.
Now that's profound because I'm in my mind right now, I'm scanning for all the men I've ever met. You might be the first one who's ever told me that about their father. So just to kind of presence that first, that I'm so happy for you. And it's fun to be meeting with someone that had that, because every man I've ever met with, including myself, they grew up with a distance from the father. And I'm always, I've worked with them through their ruptures and pains and traumas from that male to male isolation. So it's really cool that you didn't have to work through that. And it actually gives me some insight as to why it's easy for you to be so gooey.
For sure. For sure. My dad was really gooey, so that was normal from day one.
Yeah, it's awesome. We met through my course, isn't that right?
Yeah, I first came in contact with you in wealth, and
Oh,
then
right,
I
right.
I started
I did a
following you.
presentation there. Is that what you meant?
What's
How'd
that?
you, the presentation I did for wealth, is that where it was?
Yeah, I just saw you do a somatic presentation in wealth and started following you on Instagram and listening to your podcast and then in the course.
So I'm curious, how did the course bring you more of an awareness or somatic language to this men's healing work that you do already in your life? Did it, like, what did it do for you?
It was amazing because it was just a part of my path was to become more embodied. as a man. It's really what brought me to the depth of this subject, especially sexuality, was I was learning that as a man, I was so programmed to be in my mind and disembodied. So the men's work started to lead me into my body through asking, where do you feel that? What does it feel like? Is there a color? Does it have a weight? Does it have a texture? For me, I was lost in feel what? Where? I'm looking for something in my body to feel. I'm looking to feel this archetype in my body. And that was really what cracked me open to realizing this was a deep discovery I needed to go on to live my life embodied, feeling life in my body, not just thinking about it, analyzing it, and having thoughts about it.
See, that's important to me that you say this, because even though you had this emotional, even more emotionally feminine, or if, I like how you said like his energy, his expression and energy was more feminine than masculine in that way. Even though you had that growing up and you had men's groups growing up, your body still went more to a place of detachment than it did being connected. And this is what's so important to me around conversations about men and trauma healing and sexuality and somatic, specifically with men. And actually, we talked about this a bit and it feels right. So I'm going to say it here now. Those of you listening, if you're trans or non-binary, however your identity is that happens to do with the masculine or with man, what we're talking about a lot in this episode, and what I do in my work, is the biology of what we call man, right? And for some of us, that's our inherent biology that we're born with, and we develop with that biology, and our sexual organs, they express that biology of man. And what I find so profound is, and this is probably because of my experience growing up with the intersex expressions of these two different hormones. I've learned more about being a man from my trans male friend, who is actually going to be on the podcast this week. I'm having him on. So after this episode, you will hear from him.
Ooh.
I learned so much from him when I was 24, 23, 24. I met him. And then I learned even more from my gay male friends. And then I started learning from straight males, because I needed like a safety of who could teach me this based on my experience growing up.
Right.
And the trans male experience paralleled my entire growing up, because you're in this body that doesn't quite make sense to you. And then, especially trans men that start using testosterone, this huge initiatory experience comes over your body biologically of testosterone. And so I'm prefacing all this because this is where I want to get to with you. Even though you had this beautiful foundation, when testosterone floods the body, it removes you from your emotional state. It's one of the most traumatic things about becoming a man that no one talks about. And why I learned this from trans men, why it was so powerful for me. So I remember when he was transitioning, he was like, I can't feel my emotions anymore. And then I
Mm.
started doing this research and talking to other trans men and watching videos, and they're like, I suddenly can't cry during movies anymore. And this is
Wow.
someone who's lived their life biologically as a female, and within weeks of taking testosterone can't feel emotions. So imagine if you have this little 10-year-old, 11-year-old body, male body, and you start being flooded with testosterone for the next, I don't know, 20, 30 years of your life. It's huge. And so can we just kind of start unpacking that together for people listening? Like, how was it for
Please.
you?
I'm so thankful that you've brought this awareness into my life because it's just connected so many dots for me. One thing that I'll say is why my experience was the way that it was. Because my dad struggled in the way that he did, I only saw him every other weekend. So I was more immersed in the quote unquote normal world or normal society. So I was impacted much more greatly by that world.
Okay, that makes more sense. Got it. So you'd have these little kind of drop-ins with this like beautiful masculine, feminine, like balanced presence, I would say. But then most of your life was more of the social norm of the conditioning of what male or masculine was.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you have memory of whether it's somatic or intellectual? Do you have memory of what it was like before puberty?
Yeah, I have memories.
What do you remember? What did it feel like? What was your mind like? What was that like to have a body that wasn't yet being transformed by testosterone in such high amounts?
I remember feeling all I wanted to do was play.
Yeah.
All I wanted to do was play. And I haven't changed much in that desire.
It's
But I
nice.
remember just wanting to play. I remember being emotional. And it's interesting because as I'm sharing this with you and re-experiencing those memories, I realize how much the path that I've been on has brought me back to being similarly that way.
Yes. I love that. I just want people to hear that because I'm with you. I'm having that same experience in my life. So if I hear that statement, the path I've taken and your current practices and the work you do keeps kind of invoking this prepubescent state. And I say that with caution because this isn't a childlike place. This is
Right.
like a place of openness and fluidity and wonder and tenderness and just like curiosity to relate before the construct societal of male came in and the testosterone initiation of male came in.
Right.
So tell us during that, and I call it an initiation, I don't know a better word for it, when the testosterone's coming in, you're hitting puberty and you're watching movies and there's the imaging and what or the messaging. What do you remember? Like what was the construct that you kept thinking, well, I guess I have to be this, or this is what I'm supposed to act like or look like?
Wow. I didn't expect this conversation to go this way. And it's so profound already because once that started happening, really quickly, I went to disassociation. I started smoking weed and drinking alcohol really young. I mean, like 13 years old. So it was
Wow.
kind of right when that change was happening. I started going straight into disassociation.
What do you think you were dissociating from? If you think back to that, what was so overwhelming that you needed those substances to remove you from feeling?
It's hard to say. I think it was almost as if life got too stimulating.
That's a great way to say it.
It was too much. It was over my capacity
Yeah.
to adapt to social life, to the changes in my body, to now the locker room talk of women and the energy I felt towards women,
Hmm.
mother stuff, all of these things coming together. It was just an unconscious thing that my friends around me were doing and I started doing, and something about it felt nice.
Hmm. I'm just so blown away by that. Again, as simple as it sounds, it's really profound. It was too stimulating for my capacity. I really want everyone to hear this because we're not talking about growing pubic hair. You know, that's like one very simple element, which can be terrifying depending on your experience with your body. But it's this added piece of I shouldn't even say excess, but larger amounts of testosterone coming in suddenly, right? When we're going through puberty also means more adrenaline. It's an adrenalized experience. Also means like your actual penis is overly stimulated. Also means your tender emotions that you had before are suddenly no longer accessible. They're gone or they're kind of behind this wall. And then your voice is changing. And then all the boys around you are suddenly talking about women in a way that's no longer sacred or honoring them, but objectifying, right? Because they're so horny, because their bodies are so, being taken over by the testosterone. And my question is like, where are the elders? Where are the people that actually create a network, like a mycelium of masculine energy around us to say, this is normal and we're going to teach you how to use this energy? No one teaches us how to use this energy. We have horny peers and we have absent fathers. And then we have comic books and wrestlers. Like, where do we go? Like, tell me about that piece for you.
100%. And it's something that I wrote down was there's no education that lands. So basically, it's something that is so loud in the world, is all the problems that stem from masculinity, patriarchy, all these things. But these are boys that didn't have, these are all examples of boys that were never passed wisdom of how to exist with their biology, with the hormones, with these energies. So I look at it now and it's just like, it almost makes sense, because it's such a, and I'm so grateful for what you've taught me around testosterone from your community, because it makes so much sense and it provides so much understanding of, wow, I don't feel my emotions as much. Wow, I just want to fight. I just want to have sex. It really, really hit me of, wow, this, could it be that simple?
Hmm.
And that's the thing, is so many men are shaped by, ignorance is a word, but it's also like, I just feel this energetics of fumbling through the dark.
Totally.
Hit my knee here, stub my toe here, and that's my familiarity. And all the other men are going, yeah, that's what I'm experiencing too. So it's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm supposed to fumble through the dark and just bump into things and feel like crap, because that kind of seems to be the energetics all around me.
It's interesting too, because I get this kind of like irreverent image of like a oh gosh, who was that comic guy? R. Crumb. Do you remember the R. Crumb illustrations? No. I just get this like, irreverent image of someone fumbling through the dark with like rage and a heart on. And that's
Totally.
like essentially what teenage years are like for so many boys I've worked with and grew up with and in my own body. And when you're saying about this toxic masculinity piece, and you're saying it almost makes sense. To me, it makes so much sense because again, you have this thing happening inside of you. We're orienting outward to make sense of it. And the only ones making sense of it are the what I call the cinematic drag kings. These like overly masculine archetypal forces. Like I think like Hulk Hogan, and these wrestlers that I grew up with. And okay, that's my only form of masculinity. Thank God there was Mr. Rogers to balance it out for some of us. But it's like besides that, there's really nothing in the middle. And if you are in the middle or even leaning to Mr. Rogers, then you're gay, which in my generation was the worst thing you could be. So it's like our femininity that remains intact as we are experiencing more testosterone in charge is so shamed and pushed away and ridiculed. It's the worst thing you could be, especially with your peers. Now, some of you listening might be like, really? Because you're growing up now. You might be in your 20s and it's like really cool to be queer. When I was growing up, the last thing you wanted to be was outed for being queer. Like, it could actually cost you your life. So it's so ingrained in us that our femininity, our nurturance, our tenderness, those things again equal something disgusting and sinful and bad and like less male. And so if we're growing up with that, plus the real charge in our body that comes from testosterone, we have to dissociate. There has to be a way to help us get a break from this activation that doesn't know how to be related to. I'm curious, and I also just feel the need to say, because me growing up with the intersex expression, I've always been a very feminine man. And so I did have a lot of my emotions intact. And even in puberty, there were a few years where I didn't. They left, and they've only really come back to me in my 20s when I did more of this work of invoking my feminine and nurturing my feminine and relating to my masculine as a beautiful part of me, not this horrible predator that I saw it as,
Mm-hmm.
like where do you go with that for yourself? Or where did you go? How did you come to terms with this big activation coming through without any help?
Right. Can I do a side note real quick?
Absolutely.
I just want to speak to the energetics, because it kind of hit me while you were talking, that the energetics of testosterone is very active. It's very outward. And it makes sense to me that this is the energy that a boy bully would have, or a young male bully would have, that is getting information most likely from a parent or an older brother or something that's also expressing that outward testosterone active energy that is going to dominate a more yin or receptive feminine energy that's just receptive. So I saw those energetics kind of playing out of how that testosterone or that masculine energy kind of does conform the others, because the more of it's present, the more that's going to be active and outward and speaking over those that aren't as active, big, and outward.
Let's pause there. That's really important, especially because this is a great uncoupling moment for people, because masculine doesn't equal man, feminine doesn't equal woman. These are two different things. So, and this is where I understand non-binary and trans people a lot, and this is where I understand effeminate men a lot. Is these are energies, and our word for them when we call it masculine, it's just a word that means, like you're saying, outward, big, forceful, dominant, right? And then when we hear feminine, again, it's just a word that means receptive, mysterious, yin, inward. We all have both constantly moving through us in different spectrums. You know, our constructs and the way we're socialized kind of tells us we should lean more to one, but they're totally both in all of us. And what you just said was important for me with a somatic biological perspective. If you're getting big doses of estrogen, if you're going through a female puberty, or big doses of testosterone going through a male puberty, it's going to amplify one of those energies more while you're going through that, you know, rush of hormones. So I just think it's important for people to hear so we can uncouple sex. And for me, it's even gender. To me, gender is made up from humans. Sex is the biology. Masculine, feminine is the energy. So we all have the energies, and then as our biologies are changing, whether we're actually going through a transition, like as an adult, like transitioning to another gender that you know meets our spirit, or we're going through a natural biological puberty, there's going to be an amplification of that masculine or feminine charge, right? I just
Mhm.
love that. Anything else you want to add to that? I think it's an important piece to drop.
It's interesting to me because I'm having like more ripple out in me is it's interesting because that overactive energy that maybe we could say is even toxic masculinity, maybe it's overly outward and overly, speaking over people, overpowering people. It's interesting because so many people have actually learned how to embody that energy by speaking out against that. It's almost as if that energy has called it out inside of them to meet it and say, hey, I don't have to be that way. But it's required to say, hey, I don't have to be that way.
See, that's important because I live my life that way, where when I see someone doing something I don't like, I let it call it out in me. And I ask myself, where do I do that? You know, so when the Me Too movement was happening, I think it was 2016, the same time Trump was elected, there was so much, and maybe there still is, I'm sure there is, so much hostility and anger, you know, around him and the archetype he represents, right? And it's really easy for me to propel my anger at him, which to me is just another masculine wounding. I really loved the yin, which was, let me go inside. Where am I like this man? And where do I do things like this man? Where have I been misogynistic? And I think what's so powerful about that, like you said, is it calls it out. It invites it up and out of ourselves to be in relationship with so we can transform it, right? Instead of either pretending I don't have it and hating him and yelling at him, or you know, completely I guess it would be, or just actually using it, letting it come out at him. I'd rather be with it in me and see where it transforms. How has that changed it for you when you see men in the world being toxic or being abusive? What has it awakened? Where have you found that in yourself? I guess is my question.
Yeah, I think that it's been a huge part of my journey to not become a reactive mirror. Oh, you're toxic masculine energy. I'm not okay with it. So I'm going to reactively become toxically masculine too
Exactly.
and point at you. How dare you be toxically masculine while I have to meet you there? And this was a huge teaching actually with my father because he is Leo, he's fiery, and he could become that toxic masculine very easily. And on a path that was, it was as if I had to meet him there because I saw him doing, kind of oppressing or being bigger than other people. And it was like I learned I have to be bigger than him to dominate him and say, hey, that's not okay. But ultimately I found it's not the man that I want to be. It was an important lesson to learn that I was capable of it, but it's not the man that I want to be in a reactive sense. I want to have it as a tool, almost like calling on a warrior archetype that is from my life experience, having wisdom. It's time to be big. It's time to be masculine. It's time to be yang. And this is really a profound teaching in my life right now because I found myself, I almost moved extremely to the feminine side while I was doing deep inner work around the feminine. And I lost touch with myself as a man, as a connection to healthy masculine that does have that fire, that does have that leadership, that does have that courage and that confidence that's like, I got this, follow me. I'm gonna show up as best as I can and lead in my best abilities. That is that active masculine energy. So it's been this dance of doing it extremely wrong and then kind of going into the men's work, going into, circles with women and peeling back those layers and now really coming back to now that is my focus. I want to learn how to be a man in this world with that fiery energy from a very balanced, wise place.
That's so beautiful. It's profound because it takes me back to when I said I was first learning in my mid early 20s from a trans masculine friend, and he was teaching me a lot. And in that same year, my wife had gotten pregnant from me, and it was huge because it was the most masculine thing I ever did in my life. Like I got someone pregnant. I didn't even know my parts would work, because of all the estrogen growing up. I didn't know if I was fertile.
Yeah.
And so it was this kind of like identity fuck of suddenly I am a man. This is weird. Like my biology is working.
Wow.
But what was really special was the day we found out she was pregnant, our cat escaped into the woods and we were walking to find her and I was barefoot. I might have even been naked. I don't even know. I don't like wearing clothing. And I was down by the creek and I stepped on something really sharp and I looked and it was a copperhead snake biting my foot. And copperheads are the most poisonous snake in the Northeast. And so we went into the house. My wife called 911 and this snake team came. So we have all these snake venom teams here. So people will be riding in the paramedic vehicle with anti-venom and whatever it is they use, the antidote.
Wow.
And this woman came and she cleaned the wound. She goes, "You were really lucky. This is a dry bite. They didn't use any venom." And what you just said is why I'm sharing this story, because that was this huge moment in learning. Just because you have the fire doesn't mean you use the fire. It's like it's in you. It doesn't make you less or more, in this case, of a man, whether you're using it or not. It's the wisdom of when do I use it? How do I use it? Why am I using it? And that awareness. And the snake could have killed me. And it knew I wasn't going to hurt it. So its wisdom said, this is like a boundary bite, but I'm not going to dump my venom into your body.
Mm.
So I find that important for people listening, because when we see the toxic masculine out there, they're showing us what exists in us. They're just not holding the space for themselves. We're not better. We're not worse. We're the same. It's just you're not practicing and I am. That's the only difference.
Right.
So I love what you're saying about at this point in your life. You're getting back to your masculinity without shame, without like anger toward it, without disgust. And this beckons another question for the listener to hear me ask you. The experience of men being traumatized by men the experience of men being traumatized by the masculine, our own disgust with the masculine the way a woman or a feminine person would experience. Tell us a bit about that, because we don't hear men talk about that as much.
Can you say that one more time?
Absolutely. Your experience of being overwhelmed, being disgusted, even being afraid or traumatized by men and or the masculine. How did that
Mm,
present in your life? How did you experience that?
yeah. It's interesting because I've always had a natural ability to connect with most people, and that's really transferred to men. Where where I've experienced it the most has actually been in mostly in projection, mostly in systems, systematically. The one that got me the most was education system, was the education system being super masculine. I wanted it to be much more creative and open and feminine. I wanted to be outdoors. I wanted to be creative. That structure just almost killed me. It almost destroyed me. It was a big reason why I did a lot of the drugs that I did, was to avoid school. So I'd say the education system, a lot that rippled through my father, passed down from my father. He was deeply traumatized by men, by the masculine, quite literally, physically. So he passed a lot down to me through his own experience of what had happened to him. And through your work, I've even come to realize, like, a lot of it biologically, probably as well. I've experienced a lot of feeling in my body that I'm like, this doesn't connect to my experience. I've really dove deep into finding, I've been curious, like, did I have sexual trauma? And I've really gone deep into it. And I think it was just passed through his biology from his own experience. So a lot of, in his relationship with his father was really tough for him. His dad was really masculine. All he cared about was money. That's just my dad's, obviously, through my dad's filter. I know that's not true. So a lot of it was passed through my father. And for me to be seen in the systems, I was, didn't want to get a career or make money or I super against the patriarchy and all these systems. But in my own life, I've only been in a few fights. I've never really had someone that overpowered me in that way dominantly. I've been really lucky, and I know that it has some importance in who I am and the medicine that I share in the world.
I think it's important, again, just the way you said you inherited that from your father, because intergenerational trauma, it is biological, it's not situational. So, your dad could have gone through his own things, it's stored in his body, that information gets passed down to your body. And even the way he lives his life is the information of how he's coping with those traumas. And that gets, again, passed to your mind and body as you visualize him and you spend time with him and you're around him. And I think it's just important for us to hear, because the lineage of masculine domination is pretty old. And so many of us, we emerge from lineages and traditions that are really hyper masculine and have that domination to them. So it's already in our bones when we're born. And then again, we have the initiation of the hormones, and then we have the societal initiation of the constructs and how we're socialized and expected to be. So I think it's helpful, to hear, and helpful for me to say that if we understand the masculine is something that out of balance can become oppressive and dominating, and the feminine something out of balance that can become, essentially, when I think of the fawning mechanism, that's like a feminine seen response of trying to become invisible,
Yeah.
so yin and so mysterious, you retreat to lose yourself and lose your connection to things around you. These are these two spectrums of how these different energies can look and feel when they're out of balance. I'm with you, where I'm at this place of trying to notice, how do these energies nurture me and how do they disconnect me, right? And I guess I wonder, if there's any wisdom you can impart from any of the groups you've led or the people you've worked with or yourself, wherever it goes, what do you see? I'm trying to think how I want to ask the question. When you think of the men you've worked with who are trying to heal their painful relationship to the masculine, specifically the pain around that, do you see the origins being their fathers? Do you see it being society, puberty? Like, what seems to be the piece that's hardest for their bodies to metabolize when it comes to masculine based trauma?
And this is beautiful because this is why I'm so passionate about working with men and through the pathway of sexuality, because I see a lot of this greatly to do with the disassociation, that whether it comes from a father, whether it comes from society, whether it comes from a brother, whether it comes from a father figure, the mind really just makes a really big mess when it logically tries to figure out these overly stimulating experiences. And when most men are living just mostly in the mind, that's what's happened. Their mind tried to figure it out, and it just ended up in a big knot that probably got left in the corner somewhere because it was like did its best, made up a story to think that it had it figured out. But it is this, and once again, why I think the path of sexuality is so potent is getting back in our bodies to somatically move, to somatically express all this stored charge that isn't for the mind to figure out. So in the men's weekends, so powerful because we're yelling, we're moving our bodies, we're engaging in situations where we activate the body, really activate the body, and then allow for expression, whether that's emotional, physical, whatever it is, for that energy to be expressed, for tears to flow, for anger to move, and ultimately can be like rewriting a story. And we even do experiences where it's like we're acting things out, and we'll pull in someone to pretend they're the bad dad or something and rewrite this story for the mind to have something to chew on and work with. But it really is your work, which is getting men in their bodies, hugely my path, getting me into my body to discover these things, to move them, to open up, to open the body up and experience life in this way. It really, it really is, it does come a lot from dad. It does come a lot from men. But ultimately what I see is the path towards whatever your experiences were is getting into the body and expressing these energies as raw as possible.
Why I like that answer so much is because even though I was asking the question of, which origin of masculine trauma seems to be the biggest, it's the question people ask me all the time. And my answer is always yours. It's like, it actually doesn't matter. The origin doesn't matter. It's great food for thought. It's lovely to have concept. It's a great story to tell people like this happened. This is why I do da da da. And the healing doesn't require origin. It just requires being in the body. And so, what lit me up, my curiosity got lit up when you were like the pathway of sexuality. What does that mean? Like, what does that look like? What does that mean for men to connect, or for you to connect to your body through the pathway of sexuality? Especially when we're talking about dissociation and sex being part of that. Like, tell us that piece.
So in my own experience, I really was learning from people like you and other people on my own path. I realized how disassociated I was in sexuality. And how I discovered that was my mind was talking. Oh, you should do this. Oh, maybe you want this. Maybe you don't. It was this like this dialogue going on, or fantasy, needing to see this, needing to experience this. And all these pieces really came together for me in where sexuality has really gone for so many men. A lot of porn and overstimulation, traumatization of self. I started learning from the women once again, from the feminine, and watching their self-pleasure practices. It was a lot about just being nice to yourself, touching your body, being kind, embrace. And I was looking at myself, wow, I just like rush into it. It's like more of a mechanical or addictive practice. So I started learning from the women and seeing, oh wow, they're really caring for themselves, and this is about being in your body. And I just see it as such a potent path because next to death, sexuality is like the next stimulating thing for us as especially as men, because we can procreate even if we're dead. So it's like the next stimulating thing is sexuality. So this huge stimulating experience for our bodies, very activating, that is the perfect playground to learn how to be with activation and stay embodied.
I love it. So much there because one thing I'm hearing when you're saying, you learn from women and the feminine how to be more sensual in your masculine sexual experiences. So I love this reference of learning how to be a man through the feminine. Like I think that just shows us again this inherent non-binary quality of masculine and feminine as a spectrum. Like let it play with your body regardless of sex and gender. They both have so much to teach us, the masculine and feminine. So I love that, and I parallel with you there because I remember my wife many years ago before we were married. She had gone to a women's circle, and I said, "How was it?" She goes, "It was amazing. There were 12 of us, and we each took a turn laying down, and we all just touched this one person laying down with different parts of our hands." And I thought, men would never do that. Like, that sounds so sensual and delicious. And something about the feminine doesn't overcouple that with sex. Even if they get turned on, it's part of their life force, it's part of their healing. I'm like, why can't we do that? And when you were saying we were just saying, that's when it started making more sense to me biologically of the activation, specifically in a male body, the activation and the way it shows itself through the erection. It is a pushing outward of energy. It's meant to literally propel us into a womb. That's how it works, or into a hole of some kind. Like it propels us, right? And so that propellant of testosterone and adrenaline that happens when we are aroused, we're not the recipients usually, we're the propellants. That's an important piece of this because masturbation becomes soothing. And when you grow up with porn, you don't grow up with, that's not growing up with sex, that's growing up with a way to soothe your body. Like the only way you might know how to once you hit puberty, because there's no one teaching you what to do with all that charge. So you come and the charge dissipates. A break from the charge. And we don't know this intellectually. This is so unconscious and reflexive. But when we're developing with that, then sex itself, like you just said, gets overcoupled with something mechanical. It's not relational. It's not sensual. It's not embodied. It's genital focused and it's mechanical, again, with the purpose to soothe. So in somatics, it would be called auto-regulating, something we do in isolation
Mm.
to find safety. And then we take that auto-regulating behavior to another person's body, to a partner.
Ooh.
And this is where sexual trauma occurs, even in a 40-year relationship, right? Where there is consensual sex, but the one person isn't even there. They're not even like relating to your body. So I love this because when I learned this from my wife, 5 years later, I got the courage to put together a Moon Man group, I called it. This is like essentially what we're doing next year, but virtual. But this was in person, and there were 6 of us, right? Yeah. And we all took turns on a table touching each other. And it was the first time I'd ever experienced men, some were gay, some were queer, some were straight, just touching each other sensually and singing and crying and kissing you on the forehead and like playing gongs. And this wash of all these uncouplings happening of I can have male platonic intimacy. I can even get a little aroused, and it doesn't mean I want to have sex with this person. And all these things just unlocking and the sensuality piece coming in. So I'm saying all this because I've learned that male sexuality, not sex, but sexuality is a powerful medicine to invoke and use together, even in male spaces. And that's such a fine line because of our overcoupling fears of homosexuality and such. So like, how does that work for you, whether you're in group or you're alone with it? Like, how does the sexuality piece become healing instead of more activating?
Yeah, and for the most part, it's been a very personal journey, just like exploring with self. And I agree with you in that I think the world has so much room to not be afraid of embracing one another. Like even I can even see it in the world with a hug from a man, that even eye gazing with men.
Especially
This
eye
is
gazing.
something I do a lot in the men that I work with is eye gazing. And it fascinates me how uncomfortable that can be. And I know there's so many backgrounds and so many stories where that can come from, but it's just to simply look one another in the eye can be too intimate. So I believe there's so much space, and it's just about creating the container. I believe creating the container that is uh, the right people, the right place where it is that we can. I'm still working on it with myself. I'm still working on it with myself. That it's like, why when I'm with my partner do I take all this time to be sweet and address all these different areas of her body? But why am I not rubbing my feet? Why am I not rubbing my own shoulders, or, rubbing my finger across? Why am I not doing these
Yes.
sweet things to myself? So
That's so gorgeous. Yeah.
I think that I am really still in the stages of this exploration with myself. And that's really where I want to focus with the men that I work with, is because it's so deep just with our relationship with ourselves. Can I sensually care and love myself and be intimate with myself and touch myself that way and connect that to sexuality? Like that's such a beautiful bridge with self. So I really am on that journey specifically.
That's really where it begins, because once we have that, again, like the work I teach with safety in the self, once there's a safety in your own self intimacy, I can look into your eyes and my heart can just grow and I can want to kiss you and hug you and hold you. And it doesn't scare me. It's like, ah, a brother. It's not overcoupled with all these horrible things we grew up with. Like, you're gay if you're straight, and that's the worst thing in the world, right? Or even if you're gay, it's the worst thing in the world until you come out and people get okay with it. But it's like there's all these overcouplings of what that you're less of a man. No one will like you. No one will take you seriously. You're gonna get punched. Like all these things for wanting to be affectionate and kind and intimate with another man, like platonically. And I think the healing in masculine toxic masculinity, to me, the healing is platonic intimacy amongst men, whether it's emotional, whether it's touch, whether it's gazing, whether it's silence, just like gooiness among one another. So we can learn how to hold the feminine with ourselves and with each other, not depend on women or other feminine people to do it for us, but to do it with ourselves, and then enjoy it when we're in other spaces with other feminine people. And I think it's just such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful gift, to even for us to even have this discussion for other men listening. Because I heard you said about a group, and you're saying like we yell, we get in our bodies. And I find so many men's circles, it ends there. It's like you yell, okay, well, that's easy. I'm a man, I'm supposed to yell. But where's the tender part? Where's the capacity for the part that we were never told we were allowed to do, like eye gazing, like putting your hand on the chest of the person in front of you and just feeling their breath and their heart rate, being embraced. Like these are like the most rudimentary ways of touch, that a lot of cultures in Africa, particularly, there's these beautiful documentaries of these gorgeous African men in different tribes and groups who are so affectionate with each other. And it's like the backbone of their culture. And you can just see this different expression of man and masculine from them that we don't yet have in the West, except for in these little subcultures that you and I are a part of and creating. So
Right.
I'm thanking you for being here and diving into this with me and sharing your heart and so much. And I guess one thing I'm curious about is what you had mentioned, you're going to be doing some kind of group or work in, I guess y'all are hearing this in 2023. We're recording this December 2022. Tell us a bit about that and how people can find you to sign up and get more info on that.
Yeah, I'd love to share. Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to open this space up to men especially being on your show, to your listeners, I know if they're listening to you, they have a certain amount of understanding of somatics and just this path of connecting with self, being being living in capacity, working with overcapacity, coupling, all this. And I just want to open up this opportunity for men to form a group, where the focus really is on this internal fire. We could point at testosterone, but it's the fire from within, could very much so expressed through sexuality and very much so expressed through anger. But playing with the fire is the only way to learn how to be with it. And I think we live in a society that doesn't allow us to play with these inner fires in the way that we need to, so that we can be skilled. I'm not going to learn how to be able to spin fire if I don't ever try. And we have all these men living in the world that are spinning fire, but they don't know how. And everyone's getting burned because they're throwing fireballs all over the place. So I want to create a container for men to come together and play with this inner fire, and to have a men's group in this deep, deep way. Go ahead.
I just love it. It like lights me up. It lights me up, the idea of learning how to play with your fire, right? Because it's not like screaming your fire. It's not extinguishing your fire. It's not letting it burn down the forest. It's like, you can be played. It wants to be played with. Like, let's learn how to play with it. It's just a gorgeous, like, invitational approach. And the way we've learned from women in the feminine, I'm like, wow, if men could learn how to play with their fire in a balanced feminine masculine way, then maybe women could learn how to play with their fire as we do. You know, it could just be this gorgeous across all genders and sexes and spectrums. It could just be this fire, which lives in all of us. You know, I don't care how queer you are. I'm queer. I remember my ex-boyfriend was like a queen of all queens, and he loved that title. You would have totally, you know, worn it proudly. And he had a shit ton of fire. That queen was filled with fire. So it's like, it doesn't matter how feminine you are. It doesn't matter. My dear mentor, it was a 54-year-old drag queen when I was growing up. He had more fire than I will ever have. So I just like have to get this point across, you know, as we're closing this, that this fire that Ian is talking about, it is a human fire. It is a masculine movement that moves through all. And some bodies that we call men that have more testosterone in them, they have more amplified fire usually. So you're holding space for men, you know, who have been conditioned to fear, hate, overuse this fire. You're teaching them how to play with it. I just like a playground for men. It just sounds so awesome. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
Yeah. No, I just, thank you. And that's how it feels for me. It feels so passionate. It feels so playful. And I do see that that's what's happening is men never learn to play with this fire, and they're out burning everyone. They're burning down the world. They're burning each other. They're burning themselves because they never learned how to play with the fire. So that's what I want to create. And that's what I am creating. That's what I am creating. And if anyone wants to learn more, they can just contact me. My email is Ean Wood, Ian@eanwood.com. That's with an E-E-A-N. Or just find me on Instagram. I follow Luis. It's Ean Wood, EANWOOD. And for the listeners on here, I'm just hoping that there's enough Luis listeners that want to play in this way that I can just make a specific group to play with Luis listeners and create this container.
I love it. And Ian's going to be playing well, by the time this comes out, we'll have been playing for a couple months already in that container I'm doing. And I think those of you that want to jump into Ian's container, do it. You know, this is like a great place to play and learn and practice. And if you want to go more into the somatic training around it, then you have many of my containers you can check out. But I think this is a great start, and maybe the last place for a lot of people. Maybe they'll go in with you and they evoke what they need, and they can work with that for their lives.
I'm excited. I'm also excited to be in your container, because I know that it's so much of that, what we do and how we play is going to integrate in me and move its way into there. So there is this beautiful coupling, if you will.
And I love that's one of my favorite thing about this container I've made for the men's group is a bunch of them are men's coaches. So like you are, so there will be this incredible amplifying of what you already do, and then you can take that into your spaces, which just thrills me. Like
Mm,
I want these fire seeds to
the
just,
ripple.
to ripple and to blossom in beautiful fire flowers that we can all learn how to appreciate and be with.
Yes.
Uh, and just, I mean, one more thing on that note, I was thinking about, I had a session with a man early this year, when I was still doing one-on-one work. And I remember in the session, he was feeling really emotional. He's putting his hand on his chest. And I said, yeah, sweetheart, just put your hand there. And he started crying. And he said, oh my gosh, I loved that you called me sweetheart. And this is like a straight cis guy that just wants a man's love, who didn't have a father. Like these things are so important to learn how to use this fire in a way that's also feminine when it needs to be, just
Yeah.
like the snake that bit me.
Yeah.
So again, I thank you for your existence and for coming
Oh,
on
thank
here and
you.
playing with
Such a
me.
pleasure.
Yeah. And Camille, we'll put in the liner notes of this episode. If y'all want to contact Ian, you can do it as he said, or you can click on the link in the episode details. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much. I look forward to being in the program with you next year.
That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.